if you start a business in Europe, you one day will reach a point to get to internationalization, and that could cause you some troubles if you already learned through lots of examples by other companies. But yeah, here next to me is sitting Delphine. She can give us some funny stories about what could happen if you go for internationalization. So yeah, what are some nice stories?
Well, the nice stories are that as soon as you start having an international team or different nationalities represented in a team, you need to be aware that people don't think the same way and don't do the same things the same way. So, for example, I have a story about a Franco-German team that was working together, and the Germans were trying to do their projects really 100%, and the French, after they had reached 95% of their goals, they were like happy. The projects were finished for them, and so the Germans were trying to put all this energy in this last 5%, and the French were not helping, and it's just they couldn't understand why the French had just given up and said the project was finished, because it wasn't. So it's interesting, because driving the different forces in the company can be a very tricky question as soon as you try to make people do things and they just don't do it because they've decided that everything is finished. So that's one example of things that can happen.
Could you give more examples? For example, you are French and you're living in Germany. So about the difference, especially between France and Germany?
Well, there are. I think that there is a very interesting difference, which is the distance to power, the distance to your hierarchy. For example, in France, there is a lot of hierarchy involved. So if you want to make a decision, you have to go through different stages and different levels of your company. Whereas in Germany, it's much easier to go to your boss and talk to them about an idea that you've had. And so this is something that also in a business every day can be a very different thing. Things like this also, for example, the being on time. Well, it is a given thing that Germans are always on time and the French are never on time. Well, it is actually a polite thing in Germany to be on time, but on time also means not before and not after. Whereas in France, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, maybe a half an hour, depending on where you come from, is a very normal thing to do. So if you have a business meeting between French and German, the French are expecting that the Germans expect them to be on time, and the Germans are expecting that French are going to be late. So there's a middle way to be found there to make sure that everybody's happy and nobody thinks that the other is really playing with them and not being serious.
And what about the meetings?
Well, the meetings, oh yes, that's the story. The meetings is that the Germans are very practical and very, well, I'm generalizing, of course, but the Germans...
Of course, we need some nice stories here, come on, we have to do that.
The Germans, they have meetings and they are actually productive in their meetings. What happens in a meeting is they go forward in their work, and once the meeting is over and they've done their work, they go and have lunch. Well, the French, they talk during the meeting, they redo the world, as we say in French, and nothing really happens, and then they go to lunch, and that's where the business happens. So you have to be careful when you're a German and you work with friends to make sure that you don't feel too frustrated at the end of a meeting, but really go to lunch when they invite you to lunch, because that's where the stuff might happen. Okay, and that's where the decisions are made.
That is a very interesting point. And your personal background is that you used to work for Wikimedia. Give me some examples how it looked like, the cultural differences in Wikipedia.
Well, Wikipedia is a very international project, so there are ground rules about how the project is driven by volunteers, but even that idea of being a volunteer can be very different in very different countries. For example, we organized the last Wikimedia conference in Egypt, and in Egypt being a volunteer is a very high social status thing to do. In Germany, it's the good thing to do. It's the right thing to do. In France, it's like, okay, I have time, I'll just do it. So there's an approach to the project and to the way people work in the project, which is completely different. And also how the rules are made within the community, how the project functions. I mean, the fact that Wikipedia is a non-profit also has an impact on how people contribute to it. The French French don't really know about it. They don't really care. Whereas the Germans, they contribute to Wikipedia because it is a non-profit and because it is something without ads. So there's a lot of gift involved into the way they do it. Whereas the French is more of maybe a little more fun. There's a little more fun to it, or everybody has fun, I think, but there's a little more kind of carelessness about why they do it.
And you told me also something like hierarchies inside of the Wikipedia system.
Yes, the Wikipedia system has a lot of unwritten hierarchies and a lot of there's actually very few levels, but the way the people look at it in the different Wikipedias is very different. I mean, in the English Wikipedia, for example, you've got a whole judicial system. Like there is, it's almost like there are judges, and it's not the right word. They are called arbitrators. But there's a whole kind of peer review system where people kind of look at what the actions of the others are. In the French Wikipedia, it's more of one arbitration committee that kind of looks, that is more of an instance that kind of looks at what the others have done. So there are very different ways of collaborating and very different ways of addressing these different levels of people who are contributing, who in the end are all contributors. It's just that at some point, because they have more history in the project, or they spend more time in the project, they get different levels.
And last but not least, or somehow like that, could you give a hint for startups if they plan to go internationally? What should they take care about? Because now we've been a little bit exaggerating and picking out some superficial examples like preconceptions, but what would you recommend for startups wanting to get into the other countries?
I think that internationalization cannot go without localization, which means it's not so much you try to impose a product that you've designed in your little corner to the rest of the world, but rather that it's better to maybe put more of an unfinished product on the market so that you can get feedback from different communities and adapt it to different people, and make sure that if you're going to, start a new website with a new service, that you make sure that it actually answers the people you're trying to reach. And this involves knowing how people function, what is important to them, what kind of networks they are in. I'm thinking about Facebook, for example, which has a harder time than in Germany than in any other country, because at some point they just had these networks of American universities, which to the Germans are like totally uninteresting, to the French too. And so at some point, it's very hard to find the right network and it's just a functionality that's not there. So maybe listening more and making sure to take a step back and say, I have this great idea, I have this great service that I think could benefit everyone, but how would you, as a community and as people who are going to use it, how would you, twist it so that it fits your needs? So it's not so much adding functionalities and things, but making sure that you don't deliver something that's too rigid so that it doesn't let the people in that you want in.
Okay, so take that as a hint, and also if you be a little bit more aware about the cultural differences, you should also contact Delphine to maybe learn a little bit more how to interact with the people of the other country.
Thank you very much.